Dr. Amon Rath hesitated as his hand hovered over the activation switch. The cold, metallic hum of the experimental machine before him seemed to pulse with the weight of centuries. This was it, the culmination of 5 years of painstaking research, sleepless nights, and more ridicule than he cared to recount. The academic world had laughed at his theories, dismissing his obsession with ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs as little more than pseudoscientific ramblings. But now, standing in his makeshift lab buried in the Sahara Desert, he was on the brink of proving them all wrong. The Was-Scepter, a symbol ubiquitous in Egyptian art, had always intrigued him. Its strange forked base and curved top seemed to hum with a strange, unearthly significance. While most scholars attributed it to a symbol of power or dominion, Amon had seen it differently. To him, it wasn't just a decorative staff. It was a clue, an artifact embedded with forgotten knowledge. His breakthrough came when he noticed patterns in the ancient carvings. The shape of the Was-Scepter wasn't arbitrary. Its design corresponded to precise mathematical ratios. Ratios that, when translated into sound waves, produced a frequency unlike anything he'd encountered before. He called it the Was-Scepter Frequency, and it resonated at 432.91 Hz, a value eerily close to the Schumann resonance, the natural vibration of Earth itself. "Are you sure about this?" said his assistant, Tariq, a skeptical but loyal electrical engineer who had stuck by him through the project. Tariq adjusted the last of the copper coils surrounding the obsidian replica of the Was-Scepter. "I mean, we're talking about opening communication with another universe, right?" "That's not exactly. Small potatoes." "I know what it sounds like," Amon replied, his voice steady but his hands trembling. But the texts were clear. This frequency doesn't just create sound, it aligns us with the other realm. The Egyptians weren't worshipping myths, Tariq. They were describing beings that exist beyond our plane. And you think those beings are listening? They always have been. We just didn't know how to talk back. The machine, a Frankenstein's monster of ancient and modern technology, was ready. At its core, the replica Was-Scepter sat, surrounded by a web of Tesla coils, magnetic resonators, and crystalline amplifiers. Once activated, the system would emit the Was-Scepter frequency at a magnitude strong enough to breach the theoretical boundary between dimensions. Amon took a deep breath and pressed the switch. The room shuddered as the machine roared to life. Sparks danced along the coils, and a low, resonant hum filled the air. It wasn't just sound, it was vibration. Amon felt it in his chest, his bones, even his teeth. The frequency wasn't just audible. It was alive, coursing through the lab like an invisible tide. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. The air grew heavy, almost viscous, as if reality itself were thickening. A swirling distortion began to form above the Was-Scepter, a shimmering veil that rippled like water under moonlight. "What the hell is that?" Tariq shouted over the noise, shielding his eyes from the growing intensity. "An aperture," Amon whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "It's opening." The distortion expanded, revealing a vision of a world that defied logic. Towering pyramids floated in the sky, their golden peaks glowing with an inner light. Rivers of molten silver snaked through emerald forests, and colossal statues of jackal-headed and falcon-headed beings moved as though alive. It was a world out of time, both alien and achingly familiar. And then something stepped through. The being was enormous, its humanoid form draped in shimmering gold and black robes that seemed to shift and shimmer like liquid. Its face was obscured by a jackal mask, its eyes glowing with a fierce, otherworldly light. In its hand, it carried a Was-Scepter, identical to the one in Amon's machine, but radiating an aura of undeniable power. The machine sputtered and groaned as the frequency fluctuated. Tariq scrambled to stabilize it, his face pale with fear. "Amon, what do we do? Do we shut it down?" "No," Amon shouted, stepping forward. His instincts told him this was a moment of no return. "We've made contact. We can't stop now." The being regarded them silently, its luminous eyes scanning the room. When it spoke, its voice was a deep, resonant echo that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the soul. Who dares summon the Watchers of the Duat? Amon's throat tightened, but he forced himself to speak. I am Dr. Amon Rath, a seeker of knowledge. I mean no harm. We discovered your frequency in our ancient texts and sought to understand its purpose. The being tilted its head, a motion both curious and predatory. You have crossed the veil, mortal. Few have dared, and fewer still have survived. Do you understand the forces you invoke? I believe I do, Amon said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. The Was-Scepter, your symbol, it holds the key to communication between our worlds. We only wish to learn or to take. The being stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. Your kind is known for its greed. The gods of the Duat do not share their secrets lightly. Please, Amon pleaded, his heart pounding. We've spent centuries wondering about the truth. We're the gods of ancient Egypt. Were you real? Were you here? And if so, why did you leave? The being's glowing eyes dimmed, as if pondering the question. When it spoke again, its tone was somber. We are real, mortal, as real as the breath in your lungs and the stars in your sky. We came to your world when it was young, to guide and to shape. But your kind was not ready. You turned our gifts into weapons, our wisdom into chains. And so, we withdrew. Amon's mind raced. The myths were true, every last one of them. The gods of Egypt had been here, guiding humanity in its infancy. But why now? Why had they left the clues for someone to find? Why let us find this frequency? He asked. If you left, why allow us to call you back? The being's gaze bore into him. The veil grows thin, mortal. Forces beyond your comprehension stir in the void. We did not leave the clues for you to summon us. We left them as a warning. The machine groaned, its circuits sparking as the strain of maintaining the aperture grew unbearable. Tariq shouted something about an overload, but Amon barely heard him. His mind was fixated on the being's words. What warning? He demanded. What's coming? You have awakened the Watchers, mortal. But beware. The Watchers are not the only ones who listen. You have opened a door that cannot be closed. Pray that what comes through does not destroy you. The machine gave a final, ear-splitting crack as the aperture collapsed. The being dissolved into a cascade of golden light, its last words hanging in the air like a curse. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal and Tariq's labored breathing. Amon sank to his knees, his mind reeling. He had made contact with another universe, spoken to a being of unimaginable power. But instead of answers, he had been left with more questions and a chilling sense of foreboding. What have we done? Tariq whispered, staring at the charred remains of the machine. Amon didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the Was-Scepter, now glowing faintly as if it had absorbed some of the energy from the event. The frequency was real. The gods were real. And somewhere, in the depths of the Duat, something else had heard their call. Something that might already be on its way. The balance must be maintained. Do not let the gates fall into the wrong hands. The light faded, leaving Amon and Tariq alone in the darkened chamber. Amon held the glowing orb tightly, its warmth seeping into his skin. What now? Tariq asked, his voice trembling. The silence in the lab hung heavy, broken only by the occasional hiss of sparks from the overworked machine. Amon and Tariq stared at each other, both knowing their lives had irreversibly changed. Whatever threshold they had crossed, there was no going back. The faint glow from the Was-Scepter replica drew Amon's attention. He approached it slowly, as if it were a wild animal that might lash out at any moment. His fingers hesitated before brushing against its cool surface. The glow intensified briefly, sending a subtle vibration up his arm. It wasn't unpleasant, more like a pulse of recognition. We need to rebuild the machine, Amon said finally, his voice firm. Tariq looked at him as though he'd lost his mind. Rebuild? Amon, are you insane? That thing said we've opened a door that can't be closed. We might have just invited something worse than death to come knocking. I know what it said, Amon replied, his gaze locked on the glowing scepter. But that's exactly why we need to continue. If something is coming, we need to understand what it is. The Watchers, the Duat, the warnings. None of it matters if we can't prepare. Tariq ran his hands through his hair, pacing the room. Prepare for what? Gods? Monsters? A war between dimensions? We're scientists. Amon Rath stopped mid-sentence, his face paling. Not soldiers. Amon met his eyes. You're right. But the knowledge we have now, do you think any government or military won't come looking for it? If we don't figure this out, someone else will. And they might not be as careful. Tariq groaned, muttering a curse under his breath. Fine. But we do it smart this time. No more blind summoning. We isolate the frequency, figure out its exact parameters. If we're opening doors, we better damn well know what's on the other side. Over the next week, the lab became a whirlwind of activity. Amon and Tariq worked tirelessly, salvaging what they could from the damaged machine and incorporating new safeguards. Amon pored over ancient texts and carvings, cross-referencing every mention of the Was-Scepter and the Duat with their experimental data. The Egyptians, it seemed, had encoded far more into their hieroglyphs than anyone had ever imagined. On the fifth night, as Tariq slept slumped over a workstation, Amon found something extraordinary. Among a series of papyrus fragments he'd collected years ago was a depiction of two Was-Scepters crossed over a glowing orb. Beneath the image was a phrase written in hieratic script, which Amon painstakingly translated. The key of resonance opens the twin gates. He sat back, his mind racing. The Was-Scepter Frequency wasn't just a signal, it was part of a larger system. Two frequencies, when combined, would unlock the twin gates. Amon's stomach churned at the implications. If one frequency could open a door to the Duat, what would two do? Great, Tariq said groggily from behind him, rubbing his eyes. You got that look again. What is it now? Amon showed him the translation, his voice barely above a whisper. The frequency we've been using is only half the equation. There's another frequency. Another key. Tariq stared at him, then shook his head. No way. We're barely scratching the surface of what we've already unleashed. You're talking about opening a second gate? I don't think it's optional, Amon said grimly. The entity, the Watcher, it warned us about others listening. If the twin gates are real, they might be our only chance to communicate with allies. Allies? Tariq scoffed. We don't even know if the Watchers are on our side. Amon leaned forward, his eyes intense. We don't know they aren't. And if there's something worse out there, wouldn't you want every advantage we can get? Tariq sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, let's say we do this. How do we even find the second frequency? Amon hesitated. The text suggests it's hidden in the alignment of the stars. The Egyptians built their monuments as astronomical markers. If we can decode the geometry of the Great Pyramid, Tariq threw up his hands. Of course, because why wouldn't this involve the Great Pyramid? 2 days later, they stood at the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza under the cover of darkness. The Egyptian government, naturally, had denied their request for official access. So they resorted to a more clandestine approach, bribing a guard and sneaking in with a portable frequency analyzer and a small array of sensors. Amon's research had pointed to a specific chamber deep within the pyramid. Known as the King's Chamber, it was thought to have unique acoustic properties. Amon believed these properties were no accident. They were designed to resonate with the second frequency. As they entered the chamber, a strange sense of gravity seemed to settle over them. The air was thick, almost electric. Amon placed the sensors around the room, each one calibrated to detect subsonic vibrations. All right, Tariq said nervously, adjusting the equipment. We're live. Let's hope this doesn't get us cursed. Amon activated the analyzer, feeding the Was-Scepter Frequency into the room. At first, nothing happened. Then, a low, resonant hum filled the chamber, growing in intensity until the very walls seemed to vibrate. And then it came a second frequency, emerging like a ghostly echo. It was higher, sharper, and it intertwined with the first in a complex, otherworldly harmony. That's it, Amon whispered, his eyes wide. The second key. Before Tariq could respond, the chamber began to glow. Lines of light traced themselves along the walls, forming intricate patterns that pulsed with rhythmic energy. The hum grew louder, and the air seemed to ripple as if reality itself were bending. A figure began to materialize in the center of the room. Unlike the Watcher, This being was smaller, more humanoid. Its skin was a deep, shimmering blue, and its eyes glowed like twin stars. It wore a headdress of feathers and gold, and its voice, when it spoke, was soft but powerful. "You have awakened the gatekeeper. Why do you seek the twin gates?" Amon stepped forward, his heart pounding. "We seek understanding and protection. We've opened a door to the Duat, but we fear something worse may follow." The gatekeeper tilted its head, studying him. "The twin gates are not merely a passage, mortal. They are a weapon, a shield, and a beacon. To use them is to risk everything. Are you prepared to bear this burden?" Amon swallowed hard, but he nodded. "We don't have a choice. Whatever's coming, we need to be ready." The gatekeeper extended a hand, a small orb of light forming in its palm. "Then take this. It will guide you. But beware. The twin gates draw not only allies, but enemies. Your world is no longer hidden." As Amon reached for the orb, the gatekeeper's form began to dissolve, its final words echoing in the chamber. Amon stared at the orb, his mind racing. "Now, we find the gates, and we make sure they stay closed unless we decide otherwise." The return to the lab was tense. Amon sat in silence, the glowing orb resting securely in a protective case in his lap as Tariq navigated the winding desert roads. The gatekeeper's words echoed in his mind. "Do not let the gates fall into the wrong hands." It wasn't just a warning. It was a responsibility, one Amon wasn't sure he was ready for. Tariq broke the silence. "So, let me get this straight. The twin gates are some kind of universal portal/superweapon, and we're supposed to figure out how to use them without, blowing ourselves up or inviting something worse." Amon sighed, rubbing his temples. "That's the gist of it. The problem is, we're working with fragments. Ancient myths, cryptic warnings. We don't even know where the gates are, let alone how to activate them." Tariq glanced at him, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Great. I always wanted to be an archaeologist/interdimensional diplomat." As they approached the lab, Amon's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and froze. It was a notification from a secure channel he used to monitor academic and governmental networks. The message was short, but its implications were chilling. "Unauthorized excavation reported near Abydos. Artifacts matching description of Was-Scepter Frequency equipment detected. Possible government involvement." Amon's grip tightened on the phone. "We have a problem." Back in the lab, Tariq read the report over Amon's shoulder, his face grim. "So, someone else is onto this. Any guesses who?" "Government, private contractors, cultists, take your pick," Amon replied, pacing the room. "But whoever it is, they've figured out enough to replicate parts of the Was-Scepter Frequency. If they're digging at Abydos, they're getting close to something important. Like the gates," Tariq said, his tone heavy with realization. Amon nodded. "We don't have time to piece this together slowly. If someone activates the gates without understanding them." Tariq didn't need him to finish the sentence. "So, what's the plan?" Amon turned to the glowing orb on the table. It pulsed faintly, as though responding to their conversation. "The gatekeeper gave us this for a reason. It's a guide. I think it'll lead us to the gates. And what happens when we find them? Just trust they won't melt our faces off when we activate them?" Amon smirked despite the tension. "I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, we need to stay ahead of whoever's at Abydos." The next morning, the orb proved its worth. When activated, it projected a map of Egypt, marked with glowing lines that shifted and pulsed. Amon realized the lines were not static. They were responding to celestial alignments, much like the pyramids themselves. One point on the map shone brighter than the rest, a remote stretch of desert near Abydos. "That's it," Amon said, studying the map. "That's where the gates are." Tariq frowned. "It's also where whoever's behind the excavation is digging. We're walking right into their hands." Amon shrugged on his jacket, his expression resolute. "Then we'll have to be careful. But we can't let them get there first." Tariq groaned. "Careful? You mean sneaking into an active dig site run by who knows what group?" "Yeah, sounds safe." Despite his protests, Tariq followed him on as they loaded their gear into a battered jeep and set off toward Abydos. The drive was tense, the weight of their mission pressing down on both of them. As they neared the excavation site, They ditched the jeep and continued on foot under cover of darkness. The distant glow of floodlights and the hum of generators told them they were close. Amon motioned for Tariq to stay low as they crept toward the perimeter. From a ridge overlooking the dig, they saw a hive of activity. Men and women in military-style uniforms moved with precision, guarding a central pit where a massive stone structure was being uncovered. The air buzzed with tension, and Amon's heart sank when he spotted familiar equipment, resonance amplifiers and frequency modulators, just like the ones they had built. "They're trying to force the gates open," Amon whispered. Tariq adjusted his binoculars, focusing on a group of figures near the pit. "Looks like they've got someone in charge. Big guy in a suit, military maybe?" Amon squinted. The man in question was barking orders, his voice carrying even at a distance. Beside him stood a woman holding a tablet, her expression cold and calculating. They weren't just digging, they were orchestrating something. "What do we do?" Tariq asked, his voice barely audible. Amon thought quickly. "We need to get closer. If we can disable their equipment or disrupt their frequency, we might buy ourselves some time. And if they catch us?" Amon gave a grim smile. "Then we improvise." The camp was a maze of tents, equipment, and armed guards. Moving silently, Amon and Tariq slipped past the outer perimeter, using the shadows to their advantage. The hum of generators masked their footsteps as they approached the central pit. The stone structure in the pit was massive, its surface covered in hieroglyphs that seemed to shimmer under the floodlights. Amon felt a chill run down his spine as he recognized some of the symbols. They matched the patterns projected by the orb. "This is it," he whispered. "The gates." Tariq pulled him behind a stack of crates as a pair of guards walked by. "Great. Now what?" "We're two guys with no weapons, and they've got an army." Amon's eyes fell on the resonance amplifiers stationed around the pit. An idea began to form. If we can overload their equipment, it might disrupt the frequency. Maybe even collapse the gate before they can activate it. Tariq stared at him. "You want to blow up their machines?" "How?" Amon held up a small device, a portable frequency modulator they'd brought for their own experiments. "We hijack their signal, feed it back into their system at double the amplitude. The feedback loop will fry their setup." Tariq shook his head. "You're crazy. Do you have a better idea?" With a resigned sigh, Tariq nodded. "All right, let's do it." They moved quickly, planting the modulator near the largest amplifier. As Amon connected the device, the orb in his pocket began to pulse more rapidly. He pulled it out, its light casting eerie shadows. "What's it doing?" Tariq asked. Before Amon could answer, the ground began to shake. A low, guttural hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. The guards shouted in alarm as the stone structure in the pit began to glow, its hieroglyphs blazing with golden light. "They've started the activation sequence," Amon said, his voice tight with urgency. "We're out of time." He flipped the modulator switch, praying the feedback loop would work. The device hummed, its signal merging with the amplifiers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening crack, the amplifiers exploded one by one, sending arcs of electricity into the air. The glow around the stone gates flickered, dimming as the resonance destabilized. But it wasn't enough. The gates didn't collapse. They opened. A swirling vortex of light and shadow erupted from the structure, and through it came figures unlike anything Amon had ever seen. Tall and imposing, they moved with a fluid grace, their forms shifting between solid and spectral. Their eyes glowed with an intensity that froze Amon in place. "Mortals," one of them intoned, its voice a deep, resonant echo. "You dare tamper with the gates of the Duat. You will answer for this trespass." Amon's heart pounded as he stared at the beings emerging from the vortex. He had wanted answers, but now, all he had were more questions. And standing in the presence of these ancient, otherworldly entities, he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answers.